Welcome to Cooking 100-Year-Old Recipes. In this video, I'm going to make a very simple and very classic pumpkin pie. Let's talk a little bit about these orange globes that have become rather iconic in America during the autumn. Over the past 300 years, pumpkins have undergone significant changes in their cultivation, appearance, and usage. Initially, pumpkins were primarily grown for their practicality as a food source. Pumpkins are one of the few American fruits, cranberries being another one. Pumpkins were a staple in the diet of Native American tribes who roasted, boiled, and dried them for consumption throughout the year. However, as European settlers arrived in America, they introduced new farming techniques and selectively bred pumpkins to enhance their flavor and size because early forms of pumpkin were hard and bitter. One notable change in pumpkins over the years is their size. Through selective breeding, larger varieties were developed, resulting in the giant pumpkins we see today, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds. The origins of the word pumpkin can be traced back to the Greek word pepon, meaning large melon. When the French explorers arrived in America, they encountered the Native American fruit which resembled the melons they were familiar with. They referred to it as pompon, which eventually evolved into pumpkin in the English. The name pumpkin stuck, and it became the common term used to describe this versatile fruit. Pumpkins are a type of winter squash characterized by the round shape, thick skin, and vibrant orange color. The specific varieties we know today in the gourd family are still somewhat generalized in the 1896 cookbook. There are many squash dishes that do not denote a specific squash, but pumpkin pie is displayed under a recipe for a squash pie. Farmer writes about other types of winter squash, such as the Hubbard squash and the turban squash. Nothing to mention the squashes we know today, like acorn squash or butternut squash. Now, let's get to baking this simple and delicious pumpkin pie. The recipe calls for 1.5 cups of steamed pumpkin, but we're going to do a little bit better than that. This is a tip I shout from the rooftops every year for the past 5, maybe 6 years. Not just roasting your pumpkin, and you can do this with canned pumpkin as well, but to double roast it. Pumpkin is a high water fruit, and if you've noticed when you open your 100% pure canned pumpkin, it's very wet. Water has no flavor, so to intensify the pumpkin flavor, you don't need more spices, you need more pumpkin flavor. So evaporating out the pumpkin, or rather the water from the pumpkin, that's going to give you more flavor. Freshly cooked pumpkin, I can't deny it's going to taste better than canned pumpkin, but you will elevate the flavor by using a canned product. I know people are busy around Thanksgiving, but you also can do this in advance. I roast several every year. I do it in early November and I freeze. That way, when Thanksgiving comes around, I can make it the day before and it's all ready for me. And you see here, after I've roasted it for about 40-45 minutes, it should be very fork tender. I'm going to mash it up and put it back in the oven at 350 degrees. I've had 2 sessions of 15 minutes in the oven, and the oven is going to be letting off a lot of steam while this happens. That's all that water evaporating out of your pumpkin. You can see it's less wet now. Getting some little brown spots. I'm going to bring in the edges to the center because those are more dry, and you see it's starting to caramelize a bit. Here I've got more brown bits in the back. Parchment's really helpful for this step. Move these around. Make sure my fork doesn't pierce the paper. I think I'm just going to do one more time. It's getting pretty dry, but it's not quite where I want it yet. Still a lot of steam coming off. Okay. Back in the oven. So at this point, it's cooled off, and I'm going to do my measurement because the recipe calls for a specific measurement of pumpkin. Just check that I have the right amount. Now that my pumpkin is roasted, I've got it measured out. I'm going to look at the recipe, and you see how simple it is. Just mix the ingredients and bake in one crust. It doesn't give a lot of direction. So I'm going to preheat my oven to 375 and bake it in there until it's done. That will probably be, depending how wet this is, I would say I'm going to start checking at 45 minutes. Let me preheat and then get to mixing. So the first thing I want to do is smooth out this pumpkin a little bit with my immersion blender. And if you want it silky smooth, you can pass it through a mesh, but I like the kind of rustic texture of fresh pumpkins. I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to add a little bit of milk, so it's 1.5 cups of milk. I'll just put a little bit in and pulse it with my stick blender. I'll start adding in the other ingredients. First, smooth together my milk and roasted pumpkin puree. Okay, next it says to add the seasoning. So I've got 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Very simple. And my brown sugar. I make my own. I mix the molasses with white sugar. That's why it looks a little funny. Already smells delicious. And 2 eggs. And then the last ingredient is 1/2 cup of cream. I'll add some extra richness. So this has made a beautiful, simple custard. Give it a little bit of a shake, make sure there's no air bubbles in there. And then it's into my preheated oven. All right, the pie has cooled. We're going to give it a taste. I'm sure it will be delicious. This is not too different from how I normally make pumpkin pie. Maybe just a little bit less in the spice department. It's silky. Get it out. It's still moist, even though the pumpkin was concentrated and not as wet as the canned style. It is delicious. I hope you'll try making pie with a fresh pumpkin instead of canned sometime if you've never done it before. I think it is worth the extra work.